machine gun fire just started cooking off. I'm sitting there next to the forward observer and the captain because there was machine gun fire and maybe because of all that training I went through. So but this wasn't a decision. It wasn't like, I need to raise my weapon. It was, I touched a hot stove and it was like a reflex. So I'm sitting there, one second I'm sitting there taking a knee, I hear gunfire, and the next second my weapon is up. And I just remember thinking, all of a sudden my weapon's in front of my eye. I was pulling the trigger and it's a stress reaction, it's called auditory exclusion. I didn't even hear the gunshots. I watched the muzzle flash.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear our first combat story from an 82nd Airborne soldier and medic, Colin Sesek. Colin would go on to serve in special operations, but started his career as a medic fighting in Iraq during the surge. And we've had so many fans asking for a combat story from a conventional soldier's perspective in the 82nd. And Colin does not disappoint. While downrange, Colin participated in infantry operations and raids, while also wearing his medic hat, managing mass casualty events, significant trauma incidents, and even treating insurgents who were wounded on the battlefield. After leaving Iraq, Colin went on to write a play titled Bent Compass that is touring in the US and Canada about a soldier changing as a result of the war and conflict he's experienced that I got a sneak peek of and I know our listeners will really appreciate. This was a really fun episode, and I hope you enjoy Colin's perspective, albeit sometimes dark, from the conventional and soft sides of the house as much as I did. Colin, thanks for taking the time to share your story with us today.
Hey, no, I really appreciate the opportunity. I've been actually listening to your podcast for a while, and I think it's actually really cool. And then I was thinking about it. I was like, hey, I kind of have a combat story of my own. And so, no, I really appreciate you taking the time to offer this to me.
Yeah. And one of the things, just as we were prepping, there's this side of you, the 82nd, that people have asked over and over again, like, hey, I want to hear from somebody who's in the 82nd. Like, what was it really like? So we'll get to that. You actually give us that opportunity, not just, garrison, but downrange. So I can't wait to get there. I wanted to start, though, with what I think is also a first for us, which is, I believe, a conscientious objector in the family for you.
Yeah.
And I was hoping, why not just start out hard here? But can you talk us through a family member who is a conscientious objector and what that was like for you as you make this decision to serve?
Yeah. So right around, I'd always kind of been like loosely interested in the military. My mom was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and I remember I was a little kid. I was maybe 6 or 7, and so she deployed to Senegal for a few weeks. But for 6-year-old brain me, I thought she was gone 6 months,
Yeah.
And so, but there was something really interesting about that. And she took a lot of pictures, which is something that I ended up doing a lot of as well. And so I was kind of always interested in the military. And then I decided right around 16 or so, like, hey, I think I'm going to do this. And my dad initially was like, well, okay, because, I was a CO during Vietnam.
A CO as a conscientious
objector. And so it turns out that this was December of 1969. He got his draft number. He was 17, which is very low, which is basically guaranteed to be drafted. So he knew the writing was on the wall, and he decided to enlist in the Ohio National Guard, because at least then he's got some choice, like to a degree. And he wasn't a big fan of Vietnam anyway. And so he figured, well, at least if I can enlist in the Ohio National Guard where he lived, I can kind of go from there and maybe have a little bit more freedom to kind of see where my military experience goes. So he enlisted in the Ohio National Guard, went to basic training. And right around then, the Kent State shooting happened. And then he realized, and it was actually, he lived 50 miles away from Kent State. So it was very much in his area. And so then he realized, like, well, even the National Guard, I'm not interested in the National Guard even, because they're shooting student protesters at colleges. And so he knew that just wasn't for him. Military service just wasn't he just wasn't supporting that. So he went through basic training, Kent State happened, and then he just had to sit down with himself and realize that I can't participate in an organization that ended up shooting college protesters. So he dropped his CO paperwork, and it was quite the process to get that done. But he filed it, and it took a while, but then his CO status was approved. So when I joined, he was initially a little hesitant. And then I talked to him about that later, and I said, so what was that like, you being a CO and having kind of that experience in the military, and deciding this is not at all something you want to be a part of, and yet your son wants to do that? And he just said that although he does have his issues with the military, he supports people living their own life and making their own decisions. And he said that I was going to join not as like a sniper, not as for bloodlust. It wasn't. I was going in for the right reasons. I was going in to support the country, um, serve my country, wear the uniform, and also I enlisted as a medic, and so I would learn these skills. And it was, not quite an aggressive infantry go get them. It was more of a support role, more of like you help people that are doing that. You're, at the end of the day, as a medic, you are on the battlefield to help ultimately everyone. And so I treated a lot of Americans. I also treated a lot of like insurgents.
Yeah.
And not all units did that, but our unit, we did. If we injured an insurgent but we didn't kill him, it was full medical treatment, medevac, fly him to a hospital, like the whole situation. And so kind of I was like a battlefield medic, literally, for anyone on the battlefield. And so I think my dad had realized that, and he supported me going. And the one contentious point was, you can enlist in the Army under the delayed entry program, so you can actually enlist in high school, but you have to get your parents' signature. And so it was tough. Now, my mom, granted, lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, but her day job is at the Veterans Hospital being a post-traumatic stress nurse on the psych floor. And so every day, all she sees is veterans who have had terrible things happen. Yeah. So my parents were both a little resistant initially, because they had seen war kind of from their angle growing up in the 60s and 70s, and kind of seeing where that went. And I think I owe them just a lot of credit that they were, they initially probably didn't really support it, but they said, well, this is something you want to do. This is something you're committed in. You've talked about this for a while, so we will kind of let you play this out. And so they signed the paperwork. I did delayed entry program, and then I went to basic like 3 months after I graduated high school.
Jeez. Is it odd to think that it's a strange combination to have a conscientious objector married to a lieutenant colonel?
Yeah, very, very weird. Opposites attract, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. So that's an interesting family dynamic that kind of still comes up. And throughout all my deployments and all my overseas time, that there was always that little bit of tension there. But they still supported me. And they know it was something that I was good at and something that I wanted to do. And arguably, I think that the Army has actually done a lot of good for me. I think it was something I needed right out of high school. I was kind of just, I teach high school currently. And so I can kind of identify with some of those, I'm not going to call them lost students necessarily, but students who kind of need some better direction. And I knew that if I'd gone to college, I'd waste everyone's time. I would have gone to Boise State, and I would have majored in history or something. And I didn't have a plan. And I just kind of assumed, well, I'm going to join the Army. I'm going to do 4 years active duty, and I'm probably going to figure it out during that time. So one-way ticket to the Army, and kind of just navigate it after that and see what happens, and kind of just toss the dice and just see where that goes.
And you knew that you wanted to do the medic route, it sounds like, as you were talking to your parents about it. Where did that come from?
So initially, like I did some high school sports. And so I was at a soccer game with my Boise high school team, and the goalie broke her leg. It was like a tib-fib fracture, somehow like through the shin guard. And so it broke, and everyone's freaking out. And then I was about to run from the sidelines. I was about to run over there and like help her out and do stuff because I wanted to help. But then I realized I had no idea what to do. I realized that I would just be another person who just runs over there and just stares at the broken leg and goes, "That's broken." So I realized like that was like a gap that I recognized, and I wanted to fill that gap, and I wanted to like learn medicine. I wanted to be someone who could help people. And over all my time being a medic in the military and even on the civilian side, I still get a lot of value from that and just kind of helping people in those situations. So medic didn't really start. I mean, really, it probably was that leg fracture. And then once I joined the military and went to medic school and got to my line unit, um, I just liked that role. I liked that position. So I'm kind of half infantry, but I'm also there to help.
Yeah.
And in a way, I'm almost like the platoon mom. You know, I can listen to their stories. You know, I can give them an IV the next morning when they're hungover. I can hear about their breakups. You know, and I was kind of someone you can come to. And really, the job of an army medic, or like the doc, that phrase, was that person, the person that anyone in the platoon could kind of come to if they were having issues, you know, physically or mentally, and they could
Yeah.
kind of do that. And so I I just ended up really enjoying that role. That was just something I was good at.
That's fun. Yeah, I guess thinking back, especially I know we'll talk like early 2000s and or mid 2000s, but back then you couldn't just like hop on Google as like you can today. Like the medic kind of knew some strange
Yeah,
stuff, you know, like, hey
yeah. The
man, I
medic
got
knew
this thing
stuff.
going on, like what, and they don't want to talk about it out loud.
That's exactly. Hey, can I talk to you over here real quick? Yeah, yeah.
It's like you and the
Uh,
chaplain probably got some strange confessions.
we did. We heard some strange things. I had a friend call me up from the bathroom of a girl's apartment, and he says, "Hey, I'm looking through her medicine, and I see a medication for acyclovir. And what's that for?" And it was for herpes. And I was like, "Hey, man,
You want
turns
to get
out that
out of
med's
there.
actually for herpes, so you should probably look for an exit plan right now."
That's classic. Oh God.
So I really enjoyed that role, helping people
Okay.
out, and you're kind of like a neutral party in the whole thing. And sometimes I
Yeah.
would even help, like there would be an inter platoon conflict, and you would almost kind of like, all right, so what are your complaints? Go to the other guy. What are your complaints? And you'd almost be like a mediator for like for platoon cohesion.
That's funny. All right. I know we'll get into more of the medic side of things. One of the things that came up when we were prepping was Black Hawk Down. Had a huge impact on me. I know, like I remember reading the book, seeing the movie, but it came up with you too. Like, where does that come from?
I call basically anybody who joined the army from like 2003 to 2006. I'm gonna call them the Black Hawk Down generation. We saw it. You got Rangers, you got Delta Force. They're in Africa. They got cool helmets. They're doing, stuff no one really knows they're there, but they're also doing what needs to be done. There's this warlord there who's starving people to death. I mean, he's a bad guy, and no one was doing anything about it initially. And then they're like, okay, let's send a contingent of special operations forces guys, because we're not going to trust just any old jabroni to go out there and take care of this. We're going to send the guys that we trust to go out there and to handle this successfully, kind of like a scalpel as opposed to a sledgehammer. And so that movie and the book, that whole event was just about that thing, and just saying, we can't roll in there with the Marines and tanks, and we can't bomb them into oblivion. This needs to be dealt with correctly. And the correct way is a small contingent of Americans who are highly specialized. And they're trying to make a difference. They're trying to help people that really need it, that the world has kind of forgotten about. And so I watched that movie in theaters 4 times. I don't know. I mean, I read the book twice. And it was just something about that was so attractive. And I think a piece of that also was kind of that brotherhood vibe. I think a lot of people join the military for that, or they really miss that on the way out.
Yeah.
That is something that they miss the most, is just that unit cohesion with your group of guys. You've experienced things together that you will never experience with anyone else. I briefly joined a fraternity when I went to Boise State. One of my veteran buddies got me into this fraternity, and they were doing some of the ceremonies and stuff to like initiate you into the fraternity. And now we're all brothers. And I just like didn't buy it. I was like, okay, so we lit a candle and then we said some words and like, now we're brothers. Like, okay, and it was just, and I could tell for those guys, that was a big deal for them, getting their scroll number and really, embracing the fraternity. And that was their brotherhood. But for me, given that 15-month deployment I did to Iraq, I mean, it was like a hobby. It was just like something fun to do on the weekends. And so any other experience was just second place
Yeah.
to the experiences I had in the military.
That is really well put, and I've thought about that quite a bit. Um, you, we'll get to this also, but there's a play that you've written, Bent Compass. Did you grow up in theater, writing? I mean, you mentioned sports.
Yeah, I was a very weird situation just all together. I was kind of a weird theater kid in high school. I was. I got into acting, which definitely did actually help me out later on in the military. But so I was doing the theater thing, and then the Idaho Shakespeare Festival had an apprentice program for like high school or like just out of high school. And so I auditioned to that and got in. And so I was an apprentice actor in 2003 and 2004. And I met a lot of cool people that way. I was actually in some plays, I even had a few lines randomly. But then I knew that that wasn't something I wanted to do like for a career. In part because I talked to some adults who were actors, and I was like, "What do you think about acting as a life, as a career?" And they were like, "Well, you really should think about it." And I had a stage manager tell me, he was like, "Well, I'm 36 years old, and I had to collect unemployment last month."
Mm.
And so I was like, "Well, okay, maybe not for me." I always enjoyed theater, but I just knew that there was just something else I needed to do. And the military, I think that for me, that military was kind of my ticket out.
Yeah.
Because the theater thing was fun. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't something I was going to do as a career. And then I knew that the college route wasn't really, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, I know it sounds cheesy, but so my experience joining the military was almost like Eat, Pray, Love, GWAT edition. I just had to like go somewhere and just like try something new and just go for it.
Yeah.
And luckily, I mean, it really worked out. It was exactly what I needed as an 18-year-old kid.
So it's funny. I just interviewed Jack Carr, who wrote Terminal List.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he's coming out with his sixth fiction novel now, and he was saying, he grew up just loving to read books, like movies of different sorts. But he knew, he's like, I kind of just need to go into the military, and I'll write on the back end, but like I need to have experiences that really I can write about. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Colin. It just seems like watching Ben Compass, like you've experienced something that you can write about that you never could have had you not been in those events.
100%. 100%. And there was a component of that too. It was that call to adventure. It was,
Yeah.
I'm 18 years old. I I don't need to be comfortable. Maybe when I'm 40s and I got a wife and three kids and I'm going to soccer practice, maybe then I can be comfortable. But I'm 18 years old. I'm at the prime of my life here. I need to just jump into something. I need to take a risk because previously in my and so far up in high school, et cetera, I didn't really take a lot of risks. I mean, I was a high school student. I was a theater kid, which are notoriously pretty safe. I mean, they're it's not like they're riding dirt bikes and whatever else. And so I just knew that I needed to go for it. And I like the idea of just jumping into the abyss and just kind of seeing where it was. And that was just something I needed in my life because I felt, in part because of all these plays I had been in or had read or whatever, that there's just so much to life. There's just so much out there. And me, as a high school student in Boise High, and then I just go to Boise State, I haven't even left the marina. I'm still there. I just moved one slot over. I'm going to school. It's there's no challenge there. It's just you just continue living your life. And I just said, you know what? I'm 18. I got the spirit for it. I got the energy for it. Just see what happens. Just toss the dice. Let's see where this goes.
How is your experience in the recruiter's office? Is it pretty easy, or do you have a crazy shenanigan that goes down for you?
No, there were definitely some crazy shenanigans. My recruiter, I see this didn't make sense till later. But my recruiter was a 18-year service E5. So as now I'm like, oh, okay, so that says a lot.
So
Okay.
so for people who aren't familiar with the rank structure, it's a little too long to be an E5.
Yeah,
Okay.
little we'll say that, a little too
Little
long.
red flag.
A little, yeah, there was a red flag there that I didn't even, I had no idea, right? And so it was your typical recruiter. There were things that were not true, and they signed up for things I didn't know I signed up for, and it was that whole process. And I just think that was very common especially back then. And I know it's different now because they have this new Genesis system that can like
Oh,
look up your pharmaceutical records since you were like 8 years old or something. I mean, it is crazy the amount of big brothering that's going on in the recruiting process right now. But back then, none of that existed. So, you're supposed to write, "Did you break a bone?" And I said, "Yeah, I broke my collarbone in 8th grade." And he's like, "Well, does that still hurt?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "Well, then you didn't break your collarbone." So I was like, "Well,
ah,
okay."
I
So
love it.
just like lied about all that, and then I went and it worked out. But there was one of those things where you get to basic and you're like, "Oh, so this is what I signed up for. Okay, okay." And so there was a good transition there. So I did know that recruiter for a while because I signed up when I was 17. So I had that recruiter for like a year and a half or something. And I think he was just ready for me to punch that ticket and check that box that I was finally shipping out, because I was just this random guy, just like, "Yo, I'm leaving for basic in 14 months.
Yep.
Um, but no, so I think I had a very typical 2004 recruiter experience.
But you had the medic track from the start.
Yes, I did. I did have the medic track, and that was important to me. And then I even started like looking at medical stuff and just being like, "Okay, well, I guess this is my job now or something."
Yeah.
And of course, it was so much more than I ever even could imagine. Um, but no, I was excited. And then I thought about it before I went, and I was really glad I did it because um, infantry's cool. You carry a gun and all that stuff, but the medic role had this other, I don't know, psychological component to it,
Yeah.
that I enjoyed.
That's cool. Just a quick word from our sponsor, and we'll get right back to this combat story. As you know, I live in California, where we can have earthquakes and fires, and I grew up in Florida with hurricanes. I know firsthand how natural disasters can quickly and unexpectedly put me and my family in a position where we have to hunker down, shelter in place, and sometimes without power, so I always want to have food available. You can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriots Survival Food Kits. It's not ordinary food. We're talking good for 25 years super survival food. Handpicked right in a family-owned facility in the U.S., giving jobs to over 200 Americans, which we love. The kits are compact, sturdy, water-resistant, and stack easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and you can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and use the code COMBAT to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including their 3-month survival kit. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on orders over $97. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com and use COMBAT to get 10% off. That's the number 4patriots.com. Use the code COMBAT and start building your own stockpile today. And now, back to this combat story. Okay, so you go through, where do they do medic training?
Forts Sam Houston and San Antonio, Texas.
Ah, that's right. Okay, yeah, because that's where like medevac pilots would go do work there.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
What's the pipeline for that? So once you're in, are you competing for different units in the Army?
So it is well, I had airborne school in my contract, so it was like, "Well, you're going to the 82nd." I had requested the 173rd out of Italy, and they were like, "You're going to the 82nd." And I was like, "Oh, the 82nd Airborne Division. That's like the World War II, unit. It's got all the lore to it. It's got that
Yeah.
cool past, the All Americans, which and I still do really like that fact of it because it is very true. The All Americans. You get in there in the 82nd, and you were just the most ragtag bunch of weirdos from all over the country, and some not even from the country. Some of them are immigrants who got their
Yeah.
citizenship joined up. So it's just a wild place to be. So they kind of told me, "You're going to go to the 82nd," and sure enough, that's where I went.
Got it. All right. So yeah, talk to us just a little bit more about the 82nd, because I have the 101st mentality beaten into
Hmm.
me, and I feel like it's very similar, just in a different state. But a
Yes,
lot of history there that's super powerful for people who have been in it.
absolutely. The 82nd. So I went to a infantry brigade, 3rd Brigade, and I guess it's the closest thing to prison that I've ever experienced. Um, I show up, and I was absolutely a fish out of water. I mean, I'm this kind of awkward theater kid, whatever. I've traveled the country like a little bit, but mostly just like West Coast or whatever. And then I go to North Carolina. I remember one of my first nights, they put me on CQ, and I'm there with the sergeant, and It's like 3 in the morning, and I go outside of my car or something, and it's like 85 degrees. And so I come back inside, and I'm like, what's going on? He's, what do you mean? Like, it's 85 degrees outside. It's 3 in the morning. He's like, yeah, what do you mean? I was like, that's normal? Because in Idaho, it's a desert, so the heat just rolls off at night. No matter how hot it is during the day, at night, it'll be like 70 degrees. And so that was like, it was like my first or second day there. And I realized like, oh, this is like a different place. I had to do, I don't know, probably 2 hours of push-ups initially because I looked at my platoon sergeant. They gave me a tour and they go, all right, here's the treatment rooms of the aid station. Here's the treatment rooms. Here's where the ambulance parks. And here's your platoon sergeant. Here's his office. And I just poke my head in, and this platoon sergeant like drops his pen and just stares at me. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, something weird just happened. I don't know, but something's not good. And then this platoon sergeant runs out, and he just, to the whole aid station, he just goes, hey, why the fuck is this private looking at me? And then one of the senior E5s runs over, gets in my face, goes, are you looking at him? Are you looking at him? And I didn't know what, I was like, what's happening? And so I did push-ups to the point that you do push-ups and then you're sweating on the ground. You stop doing push-ups so you can mop the floor, and then you have to go back to doing push-ups. And I was, I come from, basic training, EIT, Airborne, right? And so everyone told me, don't worry, I know training's rough. You're going to get to your active duty unit. It'll be better. Like, you have a job. And there I am like, what the fuck? This is so much worse than basic training. Like, at least there were rules in basic training about like what you could and couldn't do. In the 82nd, man, you were wide open. Like, you were, especially back then, if you were walking to like the Airborne PX or something, you were open season to anybody. People, so there'd be an E5 from a different unit who would cross the street to yell at you. You were just constantly just, oh, you had a target on your back. I was an E3, right? Private first class. Target on my back. And it was just how it went. It was just like, you're a new guy, fuck you. And I was very just like, oh no, like what is this? So really that all came from a point of really high standards though. At the end of the day, it was kind of a weird, messed up version of it, but at its core, it was, there are standards that we adhere to, and that is the priority. That is number 1, 2, 3 priority. And that is our focus. And we don't care about you. We don't care about your family. We don't care if you cry. What we care about is the standard and meeting that standard and being, successful. And you are meeting the needs of this organization. And you need to understand that. And it took me a while to kind of like because when I first got there, I was just like, what dystopian fever dream am I living in? But then, I slowly got it. But I slept, my buddies were in the engineers, which was much more chill. I would actually sleep in their closet in the sleeping bag because on the weekend, doesn't matter, you're open season. You get somebody knocking on your door at 3 in the morning. Hey, get out here, do push-ups. You'd be doing, I was brushing my teeth one morning, like Sunday morning, brushing my teeth, and a corporal walks in, and I had to do push-ups for some reason. I don't even remember. I remember I got a toothbrush in my mouth on Sunday morning, and I'm doing push-ups, and I'm like, there's no safe place. There's nowhere I can be. And so I literally just camped out in my buddy's unit in condemned barracks at Fort Bragg because I'd much rather take cockroaches and poison water over some drunk E5, who wants to pick on it. Dude. So it was, but you know what though? It was good because it did harden me up. I was kind of this soft theater kid, and I, lived a comfortable life. Theater, I will say, theater people, if anything, they are nice. You know what I mean? They're not mean. It's all theater. That whole artistic vibe is all about, it's okay however you feel, and we can talk about it. And it's just very soft kind of thing. And then I get to the 82nd, and none of that exists. None of that exists. So it was a good kind of like eye-opening experience for me of like, oh, some people just like live like this. Okay. So it was an experience, but it did make me stronger. I think I needed that in my life because I love me some theater people. I really do. But man, sometimes they're emotional and they let their emotions like take over. And I remember seeing that as a high school student, and these adults who would be just overwhelmed with whatever thing was going on. I remember thinking like, but shouldn't you like not do what you're doing right now? Like I'm 16. I should be doing this. You're
Yeah.
28. What are you doing? So in a way, it kind of hardened me up, which really carried me in military, but also in just civilian life of just like being able to kind of handle the conflicts and the challenges because there will be conflicts. And I think a lot of people um, avoid conflicts and avoid challenges and are very uncomfortable. And it just so happened I happened to be challenged, on a daily basis. And so um, it was it's one of those things where I'm glad I did it, but I never want to do it again.
Yeah. And I know, without getting into it, I know you end up with the special operations side of things. So you've
Mm-hmm.
seen the greener pasture in that sense, where it's more, as we say, like kind of gentlemen's rules come
Yes.
in. They beat you down, obviously, for selection in different courses, but it's a little bit more, you do what you need to do on time and they trust you. And they despise big army for these very reasons.
Totally, totally understandable. I remember when we were in Iraq, we worked a lot with special forces teams because we were just an 82nd line teams or line companies, so we would get test out. And I remember they were one of the platoon sergeant was like, oh, these SF dudes, because they got long hair, they're not wearing standard uniforms, that kind of stuff. And for him, he was 82nd his whole life, his whole experience. So he's a robot at this point. And he said, SF dudes are just for people who couldn't cut the mustard in the regular army. And I was like, well, I want to have what they're having then, because this is crazy. It was nuts. However, the 82nd side still just comes out. It's literally, I grew up in the 82nd.
Yeah.
So it's just stamped in me, and I just can't get away from it. There's just like, oh, the packing list says that, so I should probably read the packing list says. And it's like my default is like paratrooper.
Oh man, how often were you jumping at Garrison there?
All the time. And I'm talking, and it ain't jumping how I used to jump in group where it's like 8-man sticks out of the back of a ramp. No, we're doing 64 dudes, double side doors, 3 a.m, assemble in the Steiner aid, assemble and then meet with your platoon. And then like you'll be there for like 2 days later, and there's some dude walks up to you, is this Alpha Company? We're like, what are you doing? We're 2 days into the field problem. What do you mean you're still lost? And that very well
Wait,
could
because
have
they
been.
got lost on a jump?
Yeah, they missed their Steiner aid. They landed somewhere, and then you're supposed to assemble on your Steiner aid, your little flag, which to me just looked like barely visible in your night vision. And grace of God, the only reason I'm okay is because I always landed right next to the Steiner aid. I'd land and I'd go, well, I'm just going to go next to the first group of dudes I see. And that was, just randomly was like, oh, Charlie Company. Okay, I'm here. I got lucky every time.
Oh man.
Every time.
And that is, correct me if I'm wrong here, I feel like that's a source of pride for the 82nd that they jump so often.
Yes. Yeah. We are very, very proficient. We'll say that. We're very proficient. And it's actually, there's a funny story. I got my eye surgery, and they violated all the rules. And so I got eye surgery, and you're not supposed to jump for 2 weeks or whatever the rules are, which they completely ignored. And they go, all right, you're going to go out with the recon guys, and you're going to jump in, do like a 10 click movement, and then you're going to operate a hide site for 4 days or whatever it was. And then I was like, but of course, I've been beat down at this point. I'm a pound dog. I've been beat. So I didn't even resist. But in my head, I was like, but they said I'm not supposed to do that. But all right. So anyway, we're getting jumping. It's combat equipment, the whole thing. And we're about to go. And and you're supposed to be very, very on top of it with your eye drops, right? You're after the eye surgery.
Oh yeah.
So they give us like the 1 minute warning or whatever. I'm like, okay, let's get these eye drops in. So I drop the eye drops, and they're like, all right, stand up. So I get up, and I'm hooking up, and I'm putting my eye drops back in my flick, and I drop it on the ground. And then I'm like, oh, and then I can't grab it because I have all my gear, right? I got a weapon, I got an 80-pound ruck. And then other people look at what happened. They can't grab it either. No one can literally bend over and grab my stupid little eye drops. And then it's like green light go. And I was like, but my eye drops. And so just jumped out and had to do like a 4-day field problem with no eye drops.
With the driest eyes ever.
Yeah, with the driest eyes ever. And it was in like January. It was the kind of thing where on radio guard, you just be in your sleeping bag, zipped up with the comm piece, like into like sleeping on it, like on your ear like a pillow, and you would just be buttoned up in your sleeping bag for 4 days. And yeah, no eye drops. So luckily my eyes like made it, but I just remember thinking like my eyes are still healing, and I'm in like the woods. But that was their vibe though. That was their
Yeah.
vibe. It was like, we are going to do this. Or like one time we were going to do, I think we were going to jump into a training area and the jump got canceled. So I was like, sweet, don't have to jump. And he's like, all right, guys, well, since we're not jumping, I guess we're going to walk. And it was like a 22-mile ruck. And I was like, this is way worse. Oh, sorry. No, go back to the plane. Go back to the plane. And
Oh
no.
God.
So that was just the vibe of the 82nd, especially in like the mid 2000s.
I gotta say, man, I was thinking this the other day because my wife, if she doesn't like something, she'll say it. Like the people I work with will say something. I don't. I think maybe Big Army beat this out of me, where somebody's like, "Hey, you got to go do this," and it sucks. I'm like, "All right, I'll just go do it."
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
I feel like it was beat into me early on in my 20s.
You just got used to doing things you didn't want to
Yeah,
do. And you just
like
like
I'd
generally,
love to move rocks from one side of this
yeah.
building to
Yeah,
the
exactly. I'll make
next.
a game out of it. Like, well, this is what I'm doing now. Yeah, you kind of resign your self-control to a degree.
Yeah,
And then you're just like not able to it just really kind of almost, especially when, at least me, when I was a private, like that, I just lived and breathed, I lived in the barracks, the whole thing. I That was just like who I was. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And you just did the things. Hey, we're doing this. Okay. And you just did it.
yeah, man. How old were you when you went downrange? So you're in '06, you go
Mhm.
downrange, but you just joined up in like '03, '04.
Yeah. So I turned 21 in Iraq.
Damn.
So
Damn.
yeah, I was still a little kid.
All right. So talk to me about the ramp up, getting ready to go in. Like, how are you approaching it, especially with your parents? Like, how are they handling that?
Not well. They were not happy about it. But part of me was like, I joined the army during two wars, so like this is probably going to happen at some point.
Yeah.
Um, so I do remember my dad came down to see me off, and then he actually went to one of my the medical platoon had a party, and I just remember looking at my dad, and my dad just being wide eyed, being like, "You're going to war with these people?" We were doing keg stands, just Jack Daniel bottles just being emptied out. I mean, we're just like going for it. And then I do remember, so we are ramping up, doing field problems. We went to JRTC,
Mm,
which was great. A great way to train for Iraq in the swamps. That was really good,
yep.
valuable training. Um, so I go there, and I remember the night before, I'm sleeping in my bunk bed, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I'm thinking about the next day. Like, what's it going to be? How's it going to go? And then I just realized like it's I can't imagine it. All I'm doing right now is just wasting time. Whatever is going to happen tomorrow and for the next 15 months will be nothing like I can possibly imagine. So same idea, just jump into the abyss and just like see what happens. And we had a few guys in the platoon who deployed before. So I was just like, well, I'm going to be right next to that guy. And I'm just going to kind of follow his lead and, go off of that. So the ramp up was intense. And then we went to Kuwait. We had a Mascal on one of the heat injury Mascal right away. That was cool.
Really?
Yeah. It's 20 years ago, so I can talk about it. The battalion commander decided to put us on this one range after like 10 a.m. The rule was no ranges after 10 a.m. But he wanted us to get validated through that range, so we did it. And it's like a patrol IED lane. And I don't know, 20 minutes in, you got the 240 gunners, you're throwing up, taking their helmets off, wandering off in the desert, have no idea what's going on. I take a few guys back to the tent, and then more and more dudes just keep showing up. Remember, this is like we've been in Kuwait like 3 days. We went from North Carolina to the deserts of Kuwait in like 120-degree temperature, and all of a sudden I look around and there's like 25 dudes, all various stages of heat casualties, and it's me and two other medics who are also like 20 years old. And so that was valuable, like looking back on it, because it's like, oh, okay, so there's no one to help. It's just like me and like the dudes I'm with. I can't call mom, I can't call dad. We're in the middle of this, in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
Um, and so we ended up having to actually medevac two guys out to a Kuwaiti hospital because the YCAT was so bad. And so that was like the introduction, like, hey, welcome to Kuwait, up, Moscow. But like you said, that was good. And then you also learn to respect the heat,
Yeah.
and you really got to modify your behavior, and you are not stronger than the desert. Like it will win every time.
I was just in kind of the desert in California, and it was 105 every day. And I remember saying to my wife, it's like, this reminds me of Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wearing shorts, so it's way better than having all your
Yeah,
gear on. But I hadn't been in that type of oppressive heat in a long time.
it's an oven. Yeah, yeah.
God. Okay. Did
I
you end
know.
up writing a letter or anything home to your parents before you took off? A little case I don't make it.
No, I didn't. I felt that was too morbid.
Yeah.
I felt that was jinxing it in a way. I was just like, I'm not comfortable doing this. I'm just like, yeah, we're just gonna see what happens. I didn't do any of that.
And did you know it was going to be a 15-monther?
No, that was a surprise.
All right.
That was a little bit over halfway through. They're like, "Hey, it's the surge," and we're like, "What does that mean?" Like, you're getting extended. So it means there are people who had two birthdays over there. I had all these holidays over there. But the interesting thing is, so when I deployed later to Africa, and I was with a guy who was also in 82nd during that time, and we were in Africa bitching about 3 months left, and we both of us were like, "How did we do 15 months? How did we do
Yeah.
that?" And I think it's because we were just like you said, you're 20 years old and you're just a soldier and you're just following rules. And at that point, I'd been in Iraq for so long, and it become my whole personality and everything had changed so much from my experiences that I like lived in Iraq at that point. I knew the neighborhoods of these cities better than I could remember living back home. And so, what's 3 more months? Okay, like this is just what I do. I wake up, I look at the mission, we roll out in Humvees and hit houses or do whatever. And it was just like, okay, 3 more months. I'm so used to this by now that it didn't even. Some people really like bothered by it, but it didn't even affect me. I was like, okay, so we're just gonna keep doing this longer then. Okay,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it was supposed to be 12 months, and then they pushed it.
All right. Can you take us to where you're at for your first time outside the wire?
Okay, first time outside the wire. We did a link up with some Iraqi army dudes, and we're gonna do just like a patrol. We're just gonna kind of drive around, go to a few places, whatever. So we're driving around. I think it's like my first mission out. Or actually, wait, I guess I can change that. That's my first contact. My first mission out. I do remember this was. I do remember this. We're driving down the road, and I was so green. I put my seatbelt on. And the staff sergeant who was from 101st like looks back. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, shouldn't I put the seatbelt? Okay, never mind. And then so we're driving down the road, and then I noticed we go into some overpasses, and we're in the right lane. And as we go under the overpass, we shift lane to the left, and then we go to another overpass, and we shift lane to the right lane. And so I was like, this seems intentional at this point. So I'm like, hey, what are we doing? It's like, oh well, sometimes there are bad guys on the other side of the overpass who drop grenades on our Humvees. So you have to switch lanes so you don't catch the grenade. And that was like one of my first times out, and I was like, oh. So this game has been being played for years now, and I've just dropped into, and I don't know the rules yet. And so it really was just a kind of eye-opening, like, yeah, like this is for real.
God. And then what was the other story you were telling before you
So
caught
the other
yourself?
story of my first contact, which I almost want to put in quotes, was we're driving down the road with this Iraqi army guys, and I'm bored as hell. At this point I'd done 2 or 3 missions, or I hesitate to even call them that. We're just driving around, and I'm like, man, I'm supposed to be at war. Like, what are we doing here? Like, this isn't how I thought it would be. I'm just driving circles. And then all of a sudden I hear machine gun fire. So I can hear it. I kind of hear it at first. I'm like, is that machine gun fire? And then I hear the bullets crack over the turret gunner's head. I can hear it through the turret. So it's like a muffled machine gun noise, and then crack, crack, crack right above us. And then it was like, all right, here we go. Like, this is it. We're good. Uh, let's see what happens. And we keep driving. It's the first time for all of us. We're not even sure, like, wait, so what should we, like, where's it coming from? Turns out it was some douchebag contractors a few hundred meters down, and they saw the Iraqi police vehicle that looked like a technical, like a pickup truck with the machine gun on it. So they shot some rounds at him, and it went over the Iraqi police vehicle, and then it went over our Humvee within like 3 or 4 feet of our Humvee. So we pull up to them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, sorry man, our bad. We just saw the truck with the machine gun, so we thought, anyways." And we're like, "Okay, all right, cool." And we just like drove off. It was just like, whoopsie.
And so obviously your mission set in the special ops side is very different. Big army, 82nd in Iraq. You kind of alluded to it, like wake up, check the mission, roll out in Humvees. What kind of stuff were you doing? What part of Iraq were you in?
So I was in Tikrit, which is kind of north of Samarra, north of Baghdad, that kind of part. I think it's the northern tip of the Sunni Triangle. And some missions were cool. We're going to go raid some houses. We're going to go do this. Some missions were Um, I mean, once it's so, it almost sounds like I'm making it up. They were called poo denials. And I was like, what's up? Really? Is that what we're doing? So POO, point of origin. So the base had been getting mortared like occasionally or whatever. So we'd go to the point of origin where the mortars had come from, and we would just sit there. And poo denial. They can't launch mortars at us if we're sitting where they launch the mortars from. And you're literally watching, or actually, I can even do one better. There were missions where we would have to watch concrete dry because engineers would come in and they'd concrete the IED holes, right? Well, then good job, insurgents. So they put the concrete in, cool, we're out, they leave. Insurgents go, sweet, wet concrete. And they drop IEDs in the wet concrete. So we would literally, engineers would fill in the holes and we would sit there and watch the concrete dry. And it was like, but other missions, we'd lock a city down. We'd have HVTs, we'd have targets we'd go after, kick doors down, drive through their, they got those like walls around their houses, drive through their walls and kick doors down and arrest people. And other times we were watching concrete dry. It was just was all over the place.
When was the first time you ended up having to treat somebody on the battlefield? Not the Mascal in Kuwait, but like actually on the battlefield, and what was that like?
So the first time, I'm trying to get my months straight here. The first time I treated, I guess I'll do like a really severe injury. The first time I was like, I'm not ready for this, right? Like we call it in medicine, we call it a multi-system trauma. So something of like really, really bad. It was actually a wounded insurgent. It was actually a bad guy.
Wow.
And we had called in some air support on a group of these bad guys. And so we had raided a house. We raided a few houses. They all were dry holes. And it was my last mission before I went on mid-tour leave. And so all right, let's go do stuff. Like, let's get after it. And nothing happened. They're all were dry holes, no bad guys. We kicked the doors down, did all the things, but so felt disappointed. I was like, well, that's kind of lame. So I'm getting ready to go. And then we had Apaches overhead. And so, by the way, thanks for being a pilot. You got us out of a jam a few times. So that's much appreciated.
Love hearing that.
So Apaches go, hey, we saw three, as you approached, we saw three dudes run out of the back of this house and set up on this wood line. And it kind of looks like they're setting up to like ambush you. And like we think we see weapons. So we're gonna walk you onto them. So they talk to us and they kind of move us. They can keep going down that road. Okay, and we get parallel with them. And it's like a dry riverbed. There's some trees. We're on this like road. And I'm looking through my night vision. I can't see anything. It's just a green, black, swirly mess out there. And we call it up and we're like, we don't see anything. And it was a dry riverbed, right? So not a lot of cover or concealment there. So we were really faced with the decision to advance through a dry riverbed with no cover or concealment. Obviously, the bad guys knew where we were. We had no idea where these guys were. No idea. So we were like, well, hey, Apaches, can you like flare? Can you drop a flare, pop a flare over the target just to give us an idea? And so they dropped the flare and it's like right over us. It's like 50 meters that way. And we're just like, it wasn't a comfortable tactile situation, right? We were in there. We're like, I don't think this is good. Like, this honestly feels like we're pawns on a chessboard. We're just like moving forward, like hoping for the best, And so then the Apaches are like, well, you know what? We got it. And so they're like, all right, so we're gonna set up for a gun run. We're gonna set up for a gun run. And so I was like, okay, here we go. And right around then, the machine gun fire just started cooking off. And so I'm sitting there next to the forward observer and the captain. And because it was machine gun fire and maybe because of all that training I went through. So this wasn't a decision. It wasn't like, I need to raise my weapon. It was, I touched a hot stove and it was like a reflex. So I'm sitting there, one second, I'm sitting there taking a knee. I hear gunfire. And the next second, my weapon is up. And I just remember thinking like, all of a sudden my weapon's in front of my eye. And there wasn't even a thought about raising my weapon. And so I was pulling the trigger, and I think it's like a stress reaction. It's called auditory exclusion. I didn't even hear the gunshots. I watched the muzzle flash.
Your own.
Yeah, my own rifle. So I'm looking down the barrel of the gun and I'm seeing these big bright flashes out of the end of the barrel. And I didn't even hear. I couldn't even hear. I never even heard the shot. And I think because it was just such an automatic like stress response. And then right around then, the Apaches are like, all right, our vector is set. We're going in. And so they don't do any missiles, but they hit them with those 30 millimeters. And 30 millimeters come in, and it's so close, I can like feel the explosions from the 30 mils. And I actually, before this interview, I talked to the Fort Observer just to be like, hey, was that as close as I thought it was? And he was like, yeah, it's about 50 meters. Like, I'm the one who called it in.
That's close, man.
That's way close. And so you could hear them explode, and then you would hear them get fired from the Apache. So that math was not, usually it's not how it's supposed to go. So the 30 mics coming in and just wrecking the whole, just vaporizing the whole area. And so that first pass comes in, two birds. First pass comes in, do their thing. And then because of the way that we were situated, the helicopter couldn't just crisscross whoever it wanted to. It had to get like the approach angle vector thing. So it had to go all the way around, reapproach from the correct angle. And so there was about like a minute and a half turnaround. So then we're just waiting. And we're like, well, so what do we do now? So then the second pass comes through. Same thing, just vaporizes stuff. There's starting to be trees are starting to fall down because the 30 mic was hitting trees. And so trees are cracking and collapsing. So then they approach down again and they swing around. And then these guys start like just screaming. They start yelling. And they didn't know a lot of English, I assume, but they were screaming for a hospital. They were in pain. And so then it was like, well, what do we do? Because there's been times it had happened then where bad guys would pretend to be injured, right? And be like, oh, help us, hospital. And they're just lined up with AKs ready to ambush. And so it's like, well, I don't know if we're going to take that risk. So they kept screaming, and our CO was like, just keep shooting until the screaming stops. And they just kept doing pass after pass. I think there was probably 4 or 5 passes total. And the area had been, efficiently vaporized. And so then we advanced forward, and there was 3 dudes, and 2 of them were dead right there, DRT. Some of them had like wood splinters, 6-inch long wood splinters, like embedded in their bodies from the trees, where the grenade had hit the trees and then splintered the wood. And so they were immediately dead. And then there was another guy I was checking on, and at first I thought they all 3 were dead. And so I'm checking on the 2 dudes, and I checked on one guy. He's like, oh yeah, he's dead. Check on this guy, and I see that first dude sit up like a zombie, just like out of the corner of my eye, just sit up. And I don't know if I've ever been scared that my entire life, because I was sure that dude was dead. And my first thought was like zombie, like he just popped up, kind of like robotically popped up. And so obviously that kind of damage is all encompassing, And I tell this to I teach EMT, and I tell this to my EMT students about doing a full body assessment. So just to flashback real quick, I'm in medic school and I'm doing my trauma lanes. I do a lane and I pass it, and they go, all right, are you content with your lane? You're all good? They go, yep, I nailed it. And they go, you failed. Like, why? Like, because there was a golf ball sized hole on the bottom of the heel of the mannequin, and I didn't see the wound. And then because I'm 18 years old, know everything. I said, well, that's BS. That's a mannequinism, right? In real life, the guy would be pointing to it. I would see the blood in the ground. I would see that, like, that's okay. That's a mannequinism. That's not true. So I remember feeling that kind of indignation, like, well, that's not fair. Well, then fast forward to that night. We go to that guy, we're treating him. He's just got holes everywhere. There's shrapnel from those 30 millimeter grenades just everywhere. We have to handcuff him first because we don't know what he's capable of. I ended up doing a fast 1 IV and a King LT advanced airway. And so I'm doing all these things to kind of stabilize this guy, tourniquets, all that. And then he's still alive. So it's like, all right, we gotta medevac this guy out. Because I guess we can't just leave him here. And at the end of the day, and I do like that about kind of the Geneva Conventions. Like, I know he's a bad guy, I know that, but man, we should still maybe try, right? Especially in the Iraq situation, as to, to contrast with like ISIS, like those guys can probably just die. But
Yeah.
an Iraqi insurgent, is he really an insurgent, or is he someone who was blackmailed into it? Or, there's other competing factors there. So I was like, hey, best case scenario, we get this guy, we can medevac him, and maybe he can have some intel for us that will to save Americans, And so we're doing it. We treat him. Medevac bird's going to land. We're like, all right, ready to go. Let's go. And so we lift up the stretcher, and I look down at the guy's foot, and he had a golf ball sized hole in the bottom of his heel. I completely missed it because we were in a dry riverbed with like sand and 6-inch high grass. And then I realized, like, well, I'll be like, that's a real thing. And so it was once again, it reminded me of the Mass Cow, where it was just me and my line guys were just like watching the show. And I was just going through kind of on autopilot. I was going through, I was doing the things, and I found out later that those dudes actually gained a lot of confidence because they swear, this is not true, obviously, but they swear that I brought that back, dude. That I brought him back from death. They swear. So they tell me that, dude, I'd go head first through that door because I knew that you were right next to him. Because I saw what you did. I saw what you did to that guy. And, and he lived, I think he lived for a few days at the hospital. He ended up eventually dying, which is impressive. He even lived at all, given his wounds. So it was just this experience of like, there's no one else. There's no doctor I can talk to. I can't look at the book. I have to do the things. And I saw a few other patients kind of here and there, and a bunch of other wounded Iraqis. A few Americans. There was an American who took a round through his knee and like blew his kneecap off. One dude had his headspace and timing was off in the 50 cal, and as he was shooting it, like detonated and sent shrapnel into his junk. That was a good one. Yeah. So there was one of the ODA vehicles got hit, so I had to work on like an interpreter and a few Americans who ended up being okay. Most of it was musculoskeletal, like hurt shoulder, had to put him in a sling. Nothing. I'm very lucky that I never had like an American die on me. Like I treated Americans, but none of them ever died. So I'm really thankful for that because it really, really messes people up. So I'm lucky.
I'm trying to put myself in the position, obviously never been on the ground like you were. But when those Apaches lay down fire, you got guys screaming, you got somebody saying like, keep shooting until the screaming stops. Is there a discussion before you go over? You're like, should we even go over there? Like, do we just turn and walk away?
Yeah, there was, there was like, so how do we want to do this? And, what should we do? But we wanted to advance because these the guys we were looking for, right?
Yeah.
We had a list. We had a blacklist. They came from the house that we were hitting. And it was kind of like, we need to finish the job. We need to see where this goes. And are these the dudes we're looking for? Can we scrub their name off the list, or are we still got to look for them? So the discussion was, let's finish this and let's see where this goes. And there were times something very similar would happen, and it wouldn't even be somebody we were looking for. Same thing. Apaches would just call something like, hey, we just killed a bunch of dudes setting up an IED, go find them. And we would have to do like a scavenger hunt for bodies, like in a palm grove or something.
Was that the first time that you had seen somebody kind of mangled from?
Yeah, mangled to that degree for sure.
Yeah.
To really see what that shrapnel does and what those 30 millimeter grenades do. I mean, I dug a chunk of that 30 millimeter shrapnel out of his stomach.
So, I mean, this is a 30 mil round for people who are watching. I mean, it's not small. It's got a pretty serious burst radius. And
that burst radius, it's razor blades.
Yeah,
I mean, it is just high velocity metal going in all directions. And like I said, it's split. These were 6-inch, 8-inch diameter trees that were splitting in half and falling over. So it was a lot.
As you're treating people in that scenario with these kinds of injuries, does it kind of validate like, hey, this is where I'm supposed to be. I wanted to be a medic. This doesn't gross me out. Like I'm helping people. I'm where I'm supposed to be.
And actually it's something that, so yes, that is true. And it was something from the book, Black Hawk Down. They had talked to one of the Rangers, and he said, when you're doing a really bad, mangled multi-system trauma patient, you can't look at them like a human. You got to look at them like they're a motorcycle and you're a mechanic. And you got to turn wrenches, and you got to do what needs to be done. And I remember kind of doing that, like, well, okay, he's not breathing that well, so I guess I should put an airway in. He's in, his shock is so bad, it's probably not worth even attempting an IV at this point. I'm going to go interosseous right in his chest. And so it was just kind of, it was solving problems. It was like, what do we got going on? How can I, oh, we got a hole in his back. Let's put a chest seal over that. Get a BVM. Let's see if we have airway compliance. And it was almost like a checklist. It wasn't even so much, I'm treating this guy. It was like,
Yeah.
I'm scratching off the checklist.
Man, does anybody get to that point and they're like, well, I really can't do this? Or through training, do they kind of weed people out who can't handle it?
Yes. Yeah. Through training, people would generally get weeded out. And that's the point of that, like, high fidelity training, is to kind of weed those people out and go, and you know what, hey, how about you hang out in the aid station, and that's not even like necessarily a demotion, because aid station work is super important, right? I mean, that's writing sick call notes that might lead to someone getting better care when they retire or when they leave the military. That's like disability, like there's all those things that go into that. So there was some instances, not just in my unit but other units that I heard about, that things would happen. They're like, hey, you know what, we think you should be an aid station medic for a little bit. And it was kind of a nice way of saying, like, maybe, you're not able to do the checklist at this point. And so you can hang out in the aid station.
Man, I see you have a bracelet on, a memorial bracelet.
Yes.
Are you able to talk about who that is?
Yeah, yes. This is actually a dude named Captain Rhett Schiller. He was from that unit, from the prison unit. And he was a PL, XO at first when I knew him. And the reason I wear his bracelet, I didn't actually know him super well, but I knew him decently. He was the first person in that unit who called me Doc. And he was also the first person in that unit who didn't treat me like a stupid, dumb private. You know what I mean? And I think one morning I saw him, and I think he was like, "Hey, Doc, you want to get some breakfast?" And I was like the nerd talking to like the pretty girl at the high school. I was just like, "Are you talking to me? What?" And then, or I remember one time we were doing a ruck march, and I was actually like randomly doing my pace count, and he was like, "Hey, so how many meters do you think we got left till the DZ or whatever?" And I was like, "Probably about 500." And to be fair, it was a guess. And he was like, "Well, that pace count's pretty good." And again, it was like, you're treating me like a person. And so I wear this bracelet to remind myself that one person can make a difference. And as a high school teacher, that has stuck with me, because I have some students who are in bad places and bad situations, and one person really can make a difference for your day or for your week or for your experience. And what do they say? It's free to be kind. It doesn't cost anything, right? And especially in that environment where I was just getting beat down every day. And I mean, for example, like the platoon sergeant, he dropped guys and he would go, "Hey, what if your dad was here right now? You think your dad want to see you being like this, you little bitch? You think your dad would like to see you?" Right? Or another guy, he was a little overweight, and we're running, and he was starting to fall out. And the platoon sergeant runs next to him, gets in his face, and goes, "God damn it, if you weren't so fat, your wife would love you more." I mean, and that was just like daily psychological operations, just bearing you down.
Yeah.
And so Captain Rhett Schiller was nice to me. And he was like the only guy who was nice to me at first. And it was I don't know, it had such a big impact on me, because I was just getting, now granted, some of it may have been my fault, because I probably was a pretty fucked up private, that's a discussion to be had.
Whatever, man. You've gone on to do good things.
Right,
so,
right, yeah. But at least he was nice to me. And it was the first time that I felt like, okay, maybe not everyone here is psychopaths. Like, maybe there is some humanity here, and it resembled normalcy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're like a normal person. Like, that's okay. That's cool. And I try to remember that even as I continue in the military, because I'm sure there are people, you go to trainings and things like that, and there's kind of some outsiders, who don't fit in. And it almost becomes like high school again, where it's like, oh, let's talk shit about the weird guy. And I remember kind of being on that side of it, finding myself in like the jock like crew talking shit about the weird guy, and then being like uncomfortable and being like, look, this weird guy probably kind of knows he's the weird guy, so like we don't have to remind him. You know what I mean? Like we don't. And here we are, just like laughing at him. Like, I don't know. And so, but again, that comes back to like the platoon mom aspect of it as well. Just like, of course, discipline, of course, has a place, but there are times where, you need to watch your attitude and kind of check in with that person. Go like, am I doing more harm or good here? Like,
Yeah.
how am I helping this person, or am I just making everything worse for this person? And am I really feeling better by doing what I'm doing? Like, am I am I proud that I'm, doing this to this other person who probably already has a rough situation? There's that saying that like, be kind to people. Everyone is fighting a struggle you know nothing about. And because I've been on both sides of it. And so I try to just keep that in mind. As a teacher and as a friend and as doing new things that you just don't know. And so I guess that makes me like sensitive or something, but I don't know.
Ah,
I try to keep that in
right
mind.
on. Yeah, no, that's a cool story behind the bracelet. I that's probably a takeaway for me. Just the power of saying something to somebody who might not feel as as important along the
Yeah,
way. Like you probably don't realize how much weight your words carry the older you get and the more
yeah,
experienced you get in certain roles. So I think that is a good lesson. I wanted to ask that time you spent downrange, especially just as a medic, you see all kinds of things. What's the most courageous thing that you saw when you were deployed? Tough question, I know.
yeah. I know you. Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier. One courageous thing I saw, and it was actually, so I had deployed to, or I was into Crit, and then I was briefly up in Talifar, and it was a more of like a courageous thing I kind of heard about, that we responded to right after. Um, that there was a suicide bomber who was hidden up somewhere in a building, and they knew that he was in there, and he was gonna come out, and there was dudes lined up, and so we arrived right after that, and they knew that the suicide bomber was there, and they were like, all right, let's continue, and they didn't back off. And sometimes it's like facing that situation, because a lot of people face a situation and they're like, oh, hey, maybe let's take a step back, maybe let's not do this. But then there's also a certain amount of people who are like, this is something we need to do, like this is the mission, is to do these things. And so and to do that, and I full well know there's a suicide bomber right there, but the mission is to, the 82nd phrase, like the line stops with me, like I'm here
Mm.
and I'm going to go do that thing. And so we responded like right after the suicide bomber cooked off. And apparently he had exited the door and run down the alley, and then took a few rounds to the chest vest, and then cooked off. And so it ended up working out for those guys. But it was just that idea of like, we're not going to retreat. Like we're going to hold this line, and we're going to sit here. The line stops with me.
Jeez. Jeez. I do remember as we were prepping for this, one of the things that you had shared was early on in country, I think it was, where you had a chance to go outside the wire, but got pulled. Another medic had to go in your place. Could you share that
Yeah.
one?
Yes. So this is goes back to when I'm 19 years old or 20 years old. I'm a kid, and I've read Black Hawk Down, and I'm ready for the show, right? I just can't wait. I'm finally there. I'm finally doing it. I'm in Iraq, right? So I'm ready to get after it. And so they're doing left seat, right seat rides, which is like, half the convoy will be the new people, half the convoy will be the old people. And so then they get to do a mission together, and it's almost like a tourism thing, like, hey, this is a mosque over here, bad guys shoot at us from this over here, kind of a familiarization ride. And so they're doing these, and I'm just never on. The other medics are going out, I'm just not going out. And so there'd been some people have been out like twice already, and I was like, this is bullshit. Like, I'm here, I'm ready for it, right? Like, I'm ready to be tested, right? Like, I'm at the cliff, and I can't, you're telling me I can't jump? Like, okay. So, um, I'm honestly like, I'm taking, it just shows how much, how immature I was. I was taking it personally. I was like, why am I not going out? So finally they go, hey man, all right, I think we're gonna have you go on this next one, like tomorrow. I think we're gonna have you go out. So I'm pumped. I finally get to leave the wire, because it's a weird feeling, like going to Iraq, going to war, but then you stay on base the whole time, and there's a green beans, and you can buy coffee,
Yeah.
and there's ice cream at the dining facility, and you're just, like, what's going on? So anyway, so they go, hey, I think we can use you tomorrow, so show up. So I go over there. I'm heading out. They're like, actually, you're not going to go. We're going to use the medic from the 101st. From the he's going to go because he's already been here for a year, so he's actually can help the tour. Like, he actually knows the area really well. He's medical coverage, and it's his last mission, so like it's no problem. Like, it's his last one. He'll help us with the left seat, right seat. Just he's going to go do it. And so I was like, I was so mad because I said, that's not fair. This is my turn to go, and all that self-righteous, ignorant, stupid stuff that a teenager thinks. So yeah, so I was like, grumpy. So I go back to my little chew, and I think I'm like angrily watching a movie or something, just like, this is stupid. And then a few hours later, my squad leader, one of my squad leaders from the line company, runs in, and he's like, hey, like, is everybody here? Like, we're doing 100% accountability. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm just here watching a movie. Like why? And he's like, oh, well, that convoy that went out just got hit in Adwar, and there are some casualties. So I was like, but like, what do you mean? He's like, there were some killed in action. We don't know yet, but one of our Humvees got hit with an anti-tank grenade, and there are some casualties. So we're just doing 100%. So he leaves. I remember I was in my chew by myself. I think those two dudes might have even been on the op. I was in their chew by myself. I had paused the movie. So he runs in, tells me this, and then he runs off and he closes the door. And I just remember just so quiet in the room. I was sitting there. I'm looking around, and I was almost going to start the movie again, but it just felt weird to go back into my little fantasy world watching the movie. And I just stood there for a second. And I've only been in the country like a week or two. And it was just one of the most silent moments I've ever had, of looking around and going like, oh, it goes both ways. It's not just me carrying a gun, killing the bad guys, kicking down doors. It can go the other way too. They can do that to us. That's what a war is. And I know that sounds evident, but it's something to really see it and experience.
It doesn't when you're young.
Exactly, when you're young. Yeah, in me, it was Black Hawk Down, right? I'm getting after it. I'm flying fast roping out helicopters. Everything was so conceited and egocentric. And it was about my perspective and what I wanted out of this experience and all that selfish BS. And then later that day, I found out that they threw an anti-tank grenade, which can just slice right their Humvee. And so these guys lined up, kind of ambushed the Humvee, and they threw their anti-tank grenade, and it actually killed the medic.
The guy who took your spot.
The guy who took my spot. He was 101st medic. And he was apparently had just become a father, and that was like his last mission. Jeez. And it was just one of those things of like, oh, this is a real thing. It goes both ways, and it's not, the good guys don't always win. It can go both ways, and that really changed my perspective, because it was just like, this isn't just it's not just me playing a video game. There are consequences to this. And bad things happen to good people because of the situation you're in. And so that, in a way, I'm lucky because it happened kind of immediately. I started to kind of like warp my perception of really everything. That started. And then over the next 15 months, I just kind of became a different person to a degree, not necessarily in a bad, evil way or something, but I could even feel myself changing. I could feel my opinions changing. I could feel where my lines had changed. Like, oh, I would never do that. Like, where my lines would be crossed. I could feel my lines changing. I could feel my answers to questions changing. I could feel certainly my humor just went right off a cliff, way dark, and what I was prepared to do going forward. And was I, how aggressive I was going to be. Because at first it's like, yeah, I'll be aggressive, and whatever I think aggressive is, whatever makes sense to me at this time. But then once you have something like that happens, or you start losing friends, or you get shot at a few times, your definition of aggression completely changes. But again, because you think you know what aggression is, you think you know how you're going to act, or what the proper response is to like this, that, whatever event you may think. But once you go through these things, it informs that decision-making process. And then you realize that maybe you didn't know yourself as well as you thought, because now you're having thoughts that you never, thought that you would have, occurred to you, and as that progression went on, it just continued to change. And that's kind of what the play bent compass is about. It's about your compass. The compass should be always tried and true, right? That's what you use to navigate life. That's kind of what shows you around. That's how you live your life, based on your compass. And then you go overseas, you have some of these experiences, and it bends your compass. And it's just a little altered now. Maybe not even in a bad way necessarily, but it's different. And a friend of mine are talking that, okay, so if you went through a bunch of experiences to bend your compass in a certain way, it's probably not going to get bent back. If you want to bend it back to how it was before, you would have to have something equally positive, I guess. I don't know. I don't even know how to be positive, right? I don't know how that would even be possible.
Would you want it to be?
And no, I wouldn't. Exactly. These experiences have kind of made me who I am, and I don't think I want to go back to who I was before. And I remember I was dating a girl through that, and I met, we were in the same theater company, the whole thing. And I come back from Iraq, and we were hanging out again, and I realized she hasn't really changed because she's just been going to college. I'm a completely different person. I don't know how to talk to her anymore. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to tell her that I'm a different person either, because it was almost like I put on an outfit that didn't fit anymore.
Yeah.
I fell back into my old role, like in that relationship and everything. And I just realized, like, but this is not who I am anymore. And some of that change is so subtle that sometimes you don't even realize it until it's already happened, and but I'm thankful for it, as crazy as that sounds, because those experiences kind of made me who I am, and I'm glad that I did it. And even though there's certain negatives to it, overall, I think there are a lot of positives. If nothing else, because I can see the world for how it really works.
And how young you were when that happened, man. Jeez.
Yeah. I grew up
21.
Yeah, I grew up in that environment. And we were all just kids. I mean, the average age of my platoon was, I don't know, 22. I don't know. I mean, we're really, really young,
It's amazing.
Yeah. And so that really did inform kind of the rest of my life, and just, like I said, where those lines are and how I view the world and how I kind of see things. But I think I see it more realistically, and I understand that bad things happen to good people. And, I say, like in the play, like, bad things happen, but it's not always bad. There are benefits to it.
Yeah.
I'm certainly a lot stronger. I can handle things. And I feel in this world, there are so few things worth freaking out about. Actually getting anxious and panicking and like really worrying about it. I mean, there's so few things. And I feel that it's all about perspective. Another thing I think about is, if you get in a car accident and it's your first car accident ever and it's a fender bender, that might be a big deal for you. This is the first car accident you've ever been in. There's a broken headlight. That's terrible. Okay, well, or you've been in a 20 car pileup with fatalities. Now you get in that same fender bender. Who cares? It's a headlight. No one died. I'm fine. The airbag didn't go off. Who cares? And I think that war experience has provided that perspective of just like, is this really that big of a deal?
Yeah.
Like, I failed a test, or like whatever it may be. Is it really worth sacrificing my mental health for this? Because I've seen how much worse it can get. And so for those reasons, I'm very thankful that I experienced it, the good and the bad. And that is the other thing is, it's the good and the bad. And that's true with any situation you're going to encounter. Any situation you're going to encounter, there's good things about it and there are bad things about it. And you have to tease out those differences, and a lot of it comes down to introspection. And there were times in Iraq that I remember not being able to do that. My mom, because she's a PTSD nurse, and she had told me this. She's like, you need to think about this stuff as it happens. You need to chew this up, because if you don't, you're going to be like the Vietnam vet or the World War II vet who ignored it for 30, 40 years. And all of a sudden now they're in their 70s and they're retired and they have a breakdown. So you can't bury it. You have to deal with it, in whatever way you can. And so I was trying to do that, but I mean, there were some times where there was just so much stuff going on I remember, so we'd have the butcher block, the big old piece of paper. So the comm guys, they would write SIGACs, like significant,
Mhm.
activities in the AO. And I remember one time I went to the CP and it was just car bomb here, another car bomb, IED, like all this running list of stuff. I remember looking at it and going like, all right, I'm gonna deal with that later. Like I can't. Like there's a certain. I was to that point where I was like, I'm gonna have to swallow some of this down
Yeah.
because it's just this repetitive thing, and it's always kind of building, and just at least because I was there so 2006, 2007, and it was kind of like the height of the war basically, and it was just kind of kept going and going and going, and then you just have to kind of to get by to function. You got to bury some of that down. But I did go to counseling, at the VA when I got back and all that stuff.
Dude,
And
that's that I feel like that's rare. Um, you don't meet many people who did that.
that's 100% my mom. 100% my mom.
Yeah.
Because she saw that every day. She saw what happens when you don't, and she was like, "Look, here's the and I know some people talk bad about the VA, but the Boise VA is excellent. Boise VA, I
Yeah.
have no complaints." And so my mom was like, "Look, here's she's retired now, and she's like, you're not going to see me. She's like, but here are some names. Go do it. Go talk to them. Go see about that." And I did, and I think it's helpful. And I still go to counseling. There's a place called the Vet Center. So for those people who are listening who like maybe want to go to the VA, but they're worried about counseling and some of those records being written, and the medical records and all that kind of deal, you can go to the Veterans Center, which is like the cousin of the VA. And that they have counselors you can go for free. So if you've been deployed, it's free counseling, and those records are actually completely separate from the VA system. So it's like a separate entity.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's a completely separate entity. They do free counseling, and not even necessarily just PTSD. They do divorce counseling. They family counseling. They do all those things to help you through that, and it's a completely separate system. Um, and so so anyway, so if any of your listeners are thinking about counseling but are kind of on the fence, go to the Veterans Center. It's a much kind of safer plan if you're worried about any of that other kind of typical VA stuff you hear about. Veterans Center is complete. It's not even on the same campus. The VA hospital and the Veterans Center here in Boise, probably 10 miles apart, and they don't even talk to each other. So, and I still go to counseling. I think it is very valuable. I mean, I think a lot of people should go to counseling.
Yeah.
I think that you encounter these situations in combat where it's so abnormal, and you got people back home, watching football and going to the park and all that stuff, and then there you are trying to put people back together, and it's abnormal, especially because in America we live a very comfortable life,
Yeah.
got shopping malls and golf courses. And I tell this to my students, because they've all seen the movie, the Hunger Games series. We are District 1. We
Yeah.
are the rich people with the weird
That's a great
hair,
call out.
right? Right. You can drink water out of the tap in almost any faucet in the country, right? You can drink the tap water. Do you understand how amazing that is? And so they're all there in District 1, and you were there in District 1. And now you found yourself in this weird dystopian, it's reality, but we don't see that aspect of the
Yeah.
world, you know? And
I,
so
I was gonna say, I remember when I went to it was the captain's career course. So it was probably like '07 actually. I hadn't deployed yet. I'd been in the army for 5 or 6 years, hadn't deployed. I ended up deploying the next year. But all these other guys, the maneuver captain's career course, so guys who are infantry, armor, artillery, are all in the same course. I'm like one of two aviators in the whole place. There's 100 of us. So many of them have just come back from the surge. And I remember this one guy is like, there's all these civilians here at the mall just doing their thing. Like, we got people downrange getting killed. And I judged this guy at that time. I remember I was like, what the hell is wrong with you, man? That's what they should be
mhm,
doing. And to some degree, I still I still want to think that,
I agree.
but I just hadn't lived what that guy had lived yet. And I'm not saying like in the air that I live what he lived on the ground, but I just hadn't been down there to see it. I'd grown up in the third world, so I'd seen some of that, but
Mhm,
not the horror of what you're describing. And I still think back to like, man, I should not have judged that guy for what he said there because you
mhm.
can feel it. It's weird when you're downrange and then a week later you're at a football game or playing
Yeah,
golf. So surreal.
it's almost like a dreamlike state, and like which one's the dream, which one's the real, which one's reality, and you kind of have to face that. Or like one of those nights, I was treated a patient and I went to bed. We were sleeping on an Iraqi fob. I mean, this was like 2007, but we were still like sleeping in tents on Iraqi fobs and stuff. And I've slept in a Humvee for like a week before, like you just put your head in the cooler and you just like hope for the best. But I was treating a patient and I slept on a cot and I was just exhausted. So I passed out. And the next morning I wake up and I look and I had just gone to sleep in my uniform and I had blood like plastered on my legs. And so like on the uniform. And so I was like, I can't believe I went in my sleeping bag like this, And so then I was like, well, I better take these off. And so I took the pants off and I'm already pretty disillusioned. I'm already pretty kind of overwhelmed as far as like what is even happening. And I take the pants off and I look down and the blood had soaked through onto my skin. So now I had like blood on my skin. And then I was like, I'm never going to be able to really walk away from this. You know what I mean? Like where
was it coming from, Colin?
I honestly, I don't even remember the injury. I think so. It may have honestly been an insurgent. I don't even remember because there was a few weeks there where there was a lot of stuff going on all at the same time. And because it wasn't that mid-tour leave because I went home the next day. So it wasn't that. It's honestly kind of jumbles together.
Yeah,
I had a few like close air support nights. And I just remember that moment of just taking the pants off and literally being like, once I take the uniform off, this will still be here. So if I leave the military in 2008, doesn't matter. What happened will still be here. It'll still be a part of me. Super like artistic message, I guess, that the universe decided to give me. But I don't know, but it provided this perspective, and then we were talking about kind of going back to the world. I went home mid-tour leave. So the night before mid-tour leave, I'm on that crazy, air support night. And fast forward, I go to Idaho and I fly to see my girlfriend in California. And we're eating dinner at some swanky restaurant in Malibu or something. And it's California, so there's highways everywhere. And so we were sitting there eating, and there's a highway above, but it was dark, so I didn't really even identify it as a highway initially. And I saw like taillights, just like of cars. But at high speeds, taillights look like tracers. So I'm eating dinner, and in the corner of my eye, I see what I think is tracer rounds flying through the air. But at that point, I had been so used to seeing stuff like that I was like, who the fuck's shooting right now? And that's literally what I said at dinner. I was like, I didn't hear it my brain was like, I didn't hear it on the radio. Like, what's going on? And then I look at her and I was like, oh, she had no idea what I was even talking about.
Jeez.
And so it's that kind of that perspective thing. And that had kind of surprised me because I thought that I had come in with this mental toolbox. And I mean, I think I did compared to some other people, but I thought I'd come in with this mental toolbox and that kind of stuff wouldn't happen to me. That I would, because my mom's a nurse and I know that bad things happen. I'm a medic. And so I have the mom brain or whatever. And I'm aware of these things. I'll be able to catch it before I do something like that. But where I'm at a dinner in California and I think I'm getting shot at, and then it happened. And then same thing. I had this moment of realization of like, oh, nope, that happened. Like it's a little bit kind of more than I thought. And I think a lot of that is my age. I was a kid. I was a late bloomer anyway. So I think being like 20, I still was just like a kid. And I had never really seen bad things before,
Yeah. God. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was bird flu as it came up. Could you talk us through this when I was cracking up hearing about this?
So speaking of just being kind of weird, so I had been there for 15 months, and after you've been somewhere like that, your brain just kind of gets a little weird sometimes. And so we had been called to I think it was like a mortar cache, and I think when we got there, I think it was just the mortar fuses. And so it's not worth like calling EOD usually because they're almost like snakes, like the fireworks snakes. You can just light them. They kind of light on fire and then they burn out. And it's like nothing. They don't explode. They just kind of burn. So we had a bunch of fuses, and we're like, okay, let's burn the fuses and just get out of here. Like that's all this was, just a bunch of fuses. So put them on a pile. We burn it. And the fire goes up, pretty decent fire. And I kind of look over at this bush, and there's this little Tweety bird, little finch bird, like right next to me. and he's kind of like watching the fire. I saw the reflection of the fire in the bird's eye. So I saw this little glint and I was like, huh? So then I was like, I wonder if I can grab this thing. So then I just grabbed it. So then I grabbed this bird and then but see, this shows the immaturity. I had no plan after that. It was like, can I grab this bird? And it was like, I got the bird. And then it was like, I'm not sure what to do now. So then I just held the bird and then we just watched the fire burn together. And the bird just stayed in my hand. And I think I actually have a video of it. I had a helmet cam running. If I can find it, I'll send it to you. And this bird just like watching the fire. And I'm walking around and I'm like, hey, I have this bird. And then I think I like put it in my pocket just to be like, I got this. I have a friend now. I think part of that was I was so desperate for like a pet. You know what I mean? I was just tired of just like guns and dudes that I just wanted a bird. So I put this bird in my pocket and then whenever we finished up, grabbed the bird and then I released him and that was it. And then the next day I'm at the clinic. Some guys had to get vaccinations or something. And so I'm at the clinic and we walk in and the staff is putting up like posters around the clinic. And I look at the poster and it's like, caution, bird flu, like do not interact with the birds. And there's all this information about it. And so then I was like, oh no. And I looked down at my hand. I'm like, am I still wearing the same pants with the bird in it? Probably. So I go up to her and I was like, oh, like bird flu, huh? And she's like, yeah, there's something going around. It's like a bird epidemic. It's killing a bunch of birds in the area. And I was like, oh, and she's like, oh, and it's possible to get sick from it. I said, okay, so like, how serious is it? And she's like, well, I mean, I'm sure you're fine as long as you didn't like grab a bird or something. And I just looked at her and I was like, oh, all right, I won't grab a bird again. And then I just walked, didn't say anything, just like, okay, good to know. And then just washed my hands like 10 times that day. And I think I'd poured hand sanitizer in the pocket. I just like opened the thing and just
That'll do it.
Right? That's hand sanitizer kills everything.
Oh, man.
So yeah, so that was well, again, just kind of shows like where my brain was like half adult but like half kid. And as you're trying to develop, you're trying to grow up, but you're growing up in this really fucked up weird situation. And it's just you make weird choices.
I was just thinking like how many 20-year-old Americans here somewhere in like, I don't know, Idaho, California, are 20 watching mortars burn out, grab a bird, have it in their hand. It's so rare, just random.
So random. So random. Yeah.
Oh man. All right. I'll get you out of here in a second, Colin. Just I try to ask people like what's some of the hardest things they personally had to do when they were downrange. Definitely don't want you to be humble on this, but just to give people, some insight into some of the challenges that we go through. When you think of some of the hardest things you had to do, what comes to mind for you?
So when I was downrange, this was a hard mental, so just like we're talking about, this kind of development and you're progressing. And I grew up 10 years when I was over there. And it's then at a certain point, you do have to look at what you're doing and you got to consider, what am I doing here? Is it weapons of mass destruction? I don't think so, right? At least not that I've seen, right? So then so you have to figure that out. What's my purpose here? What am I really doing here? And that became difficult. I remember one time we raided a house and the terp was somewhere else. And we arrested a guy. He was on our blacklist. And there's actually, there was a picture that the combat cameraman took. And it was a woman in her front yard, like on the ground crying with their little kid. So we arrested this guy. She didn't really speak English. And then I realized, even if you could speak the same language, I don't know why he's on this list either. Is he a financer? Is he an ID in place? Or it's just a list. He's on the list. Let's go get him. But we didn't have an interpreter. So this poor woman just gets her husband snatched by the Americans with no information. I can't tell you when you're going to see him again. I can't tell you what he did. I can't tell you where he's going. I can't tell you how to contact him. I cannot tell you anything. And so that was when that kind of started to creep in of just like, man, there's, what are we trying to accomplish here? And so there was one night I was on QRF. We had a QRF rotation. And so we're on QRF. It was the Saturday night before Easter. So Easter was that Sunday. And so I'm like, okay, Easter Sunday's been quiet for a few days. I'm just gonna go to bed early, like do whatever. Which is obviously a dumb thing because it's a Christian holiday. So I should have known better. So I go to sleep And I'm like in a deep sleep, and I wake up and they're like, hey, air weapons teams just lit some dudes up. And then they ran off to a house. So we're going to go hit the house and like take care of it. So again, I'm kind of just in this moment of like, oh, it's Easter Sunday, I'll sleep in, whatever. And then boom, I'm into it with like no warning. So we drive to the house, dry hole, nobody there. The issue was, so Apache saw guys implanting an ID, 4 dudes. They shot them up. 2 of them died on scene. 2 of them ran into this house. So then they were running out of fuel. So then they were like, hey, here's the grid to the house. We got to go. So we go over to the house. We hit it, dry hole. Well, then it's like, well, there's those bodies over there. So again, a scavenger hunt for the bodies. So then we find these 2 dudes that are just splayed out, dead on the ground. And it was that a little bit of hearts and minds of like, well, we don't just want to leave them here, especially in their culture. It's kind of disrespectful to do that. So we're bagging them up, and I'm just like tired. And again, I'm in this weird place mentally of just like, what is even happening? So we bag them up, and we got to take them to the Iraqi police station. It was almost like a courtesy thing, I guess. We didn't want to leave them in the field, but we didn't know what to do. We're not going to, put them on the sidewalk. So we were like, all right, well, let's take them to the Iraqi police station. I just remember we zip them up, and we got the bag, and we're hoisting them on the hood of the truck. And I think it was me or my buddy were just like, oh, well, happy Easter. And we just like threw the bodies on the hood. And then we're driving down the road, and you can barely even see the road because we got 2 body bags on the hood. And I remember thinking, what if someone sees us right now and they see an American Humvee, which initially was the vehicle of freedom and safety and security. And we're driving in their city, through their city, with bags on the hood. And I don't care. There's nothing I could really say to kind of make that be okay, just for the imagery. There's not a lot of words I could apply that would detract from the imagery of what they're seeing. And then that struggle of just like, we got civilians dying, we got Americans dying, and I have to interact with this public now for the next 6 months or however much longer I was there. And how am I going to do that after this event? Because it's saying, hey, we're here to help you, we're here to support you, but we will also kill you. And it was just a very mentally tough thing because there were so many competing emotions with just how he's feeling. And so, yeah, so all these Americans are dying. And for what purpose? What are we really doing here? And then, these civilians are dying. And then some ladies, looking out her kitchen window, and she sees the Americans with body bags. Is she on the American side now? What do you think did that push her towards the Americans or push her away from the Americans? Is that what we just did? Even though technically the right thing, right? We didn't leave them there. Is that going to make us safer or make us more in danger doing those things? And so it becomes this 69-degree, chess match of what is the best way to do this. And we're trying to say we're here to help, but are we going to address what we did last night? Are we going to address what that looks like? And there I am, a 20-year-old, having to face those decisions and having to face that.
If we have to edit this next question out, we will. So just no
Okay.
issue if we can't answer. Having moved and seen the special ops side, I have to assume the target lists are different, right? For big army versus what SF is going after. It's a little more purposeful. Like, this guy is bad, we got to remove
and
him.
Here's why. Yeah.
And compared to like, hey, you got a list of names and you just got to go down it, right? And I understand the bureaucracy that is the army has to be that way. Do you look differently on the conventional guys after you made the jump? Do you kind of look back like, God damn, that's a hard job being on the conventional side?
Yes. Because it's that sledgehammer versus scalpel.
Yeah.
And it is, for example, and perfect example. So we were going after this guy named Kateba. I don't think that's classified, but it's 20 years ago. Who cares? He was an IED facilitator. He would kind of arrange all the things. So he was like a little guy. Apparently, he used to like blend in with children sometimes because he was so short. So we'd go after Kateba. We hit that dude's house so many times they stopped replacing like the garage door, like the sliding door. They just stopped putting it up because we'd hit his house like once a month. Like, we'd get intel that he was back home or he'd be over here or whatever, and so we'd hit this dude. We go after him. Never got him. We were going after him for probably 6 months. So we were raiding his house, like I said, probably once a month at least. So we're doing all that, never get him, never get him, never get him. Rangers, we had a ranger battalion, a ranger company, like somewhere near our base or whatever. Finally, Kateba has caused enough problems that he showed up on their list now, right? So Rangers go in, he's on their list, Rangers go get him, first time. No problem. Boom, show up, get him, nab him, in and out in 5 minutes. And yeah, there we are with our pants down our, down our ankles, just like tripping over ourselves, trying to get him. You know what I mean? So the intel network is better, the training is better. But I think there's something to be said for like, this is who we're going after, this is who we need to go after, and this is why, versus like, well, here's a blacklist that has been produced by some intel dudes you'll never meet.
Yeah, just trust us, kind of a.
Just trust us. Or like another good one was, there was a city, Oja, we locked it down. And this is that difference between conventional army and special operations side. So we locked the village to the city down, and our battalion commander goes, you know what? I'm going to do the right thing here, and I'm going to give the blacklist to the city council of the city. So then they can turn themselves in. We're going to do the right thing, right? Hey, we'll give you a chance. I think it was 48 hours, 24 hours. Here's the list of who's on our list. They need to turn themselves over. So, and he said, here's the expectation though. You don't turn yourself over, we're going to come in your city and we're going to wreck a lot of stuff. So up to you. So we lock down the city, ins and outs, no one in or out. The only vehicle we allow in and out is an ambulance for like emergencies, right? So even I remember thinking, I'm a 20-year-old, but even I was like, that ambulance seems to be doing a lot of runs. Like, is there just a lot of people dying here? So we 24 hours, one person turned themselves in, maybe. So we're like, okay, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Here we go. And so we go in and we just wreck that place. We're doing 8 raids a night. We're just kicking down doors, breaking stuff, just going for it. Don't find anything. Come to find out, the city council had alerted everybody on the blacklist and had escorted them out of the city on the ambulance. So again, that's conventional. That's sledgehammer thinking. That's like, we're going to lock down city. Oh, ambulance, good, go. It's like, we didn't even think to like look, it was like, oh, so what's going on here? Oh, heart attack. Oh, by all means, continue. And we didn't even do the math. And the best part was I told that story to a buddy of mine I met at Bragg. And he was like, that was you? I was like, what? He was in Baghdad and he was briefed on. He was like, some stupid unit up into Crit let an ambulance go in and out of the containment for 24 hours and escorted out all the bad guys. Like, I'm glad that we're famous. I'm glad that we're making rounds here. Yeah.
All right. Where does Bent Compass come from for you? Like, when does this come up?
So, kind of a weird story. So I was an actor kid at Shakespeare Festival, and the actor people, they were nice. When I joined them, I want to join the army, but they were kind of confused. They were like proud, but also like, okay, I guess that you could do that. Because for them, that was just so not what they were about. But there's a guy I met named Neil Berkshire. We shared a dressing room together, and he was a cool dude. Same idea. He was an actor, but he was like, oh, that's cool that you're doing something different, And so I joined the army, all that. And years even after I come back from Iraq, he called me up and he was in a Shakespeare play where he played a character who was returning from war. And he wanted to just do some like character research kind of and say, hey, I got this character. He just come back. And, he's thinking these things. He's saying these things. How was that for you when you came back from war? How does this check out? Like, what do you think? And so we were talking about that for a while, and I was like, no, that would make sense. And it's, amazing. Shakespeare wrote that, 600 years ago. And so I'm like, yeah, that checks out. And so we kept talking. And then he was like, he's like, this is actually pretty good. Like, some of your stories are interesting. Your perspective is interesting. Let me record some of these. So then we recorded it, and he just said, I don't know if this is going to do anything or go anywhere, but I kind of want to transcribe these and, see where this goes. And then over years, it's like morphed. It was never an intentional thing. It never was like, hey, let's go write this play. It just it was just something we explored, and he formed it into this play. And because we're too poor for a screenplay, So he formed it into this piece, and it's called Bend Compass, and it's about that process of kind of what we've been talking about, how you go from just like this random American who's lived a typical American life. You go to movies on, Sundays, whatever, and then you kind of morph yourself into this like combat veteran, and you go through the changes, and these changes are happening faster than you're even aware of. And then you might do certain things or say certain things that surprise you, and you go, I thought I knew myself better than this. What's happening? And so the play is about that process of how slow and how fast those things can change. And we've done a few festivals in Ohio. It's in Chicago next month, and Canada over the summer. And so far, the reception's been very positive, and we've heard from both sides. We've heard veterans appreciate it. Now, I understand some veterans don't want to see it, and look, I get it. I went to war. I don't need to see someone else's story. I get that. So some veterans are not just, and it's nothing personal. It's just like, I know what my Iraq story is. Like, why do I want to see someone else's? Which is fair. But the veterans that have seen it, they appreciate it, and they say, no, that was good. You put words to things that I felt that I wasn't sure how to say. So there's a benefit there to the veteran community, and it kind of speaks to them in certain ways. And then honestly, maybe even the bigger benefit is to the civilian side, because they get to kind of see that progression. You get to kind of see it's only like 45 minutes long, but you get to see the kind of the person talking about those experiences and why things have changed. And so the civilian side can go, I've been told this by multiple people, like, my dad was a veteran, my husband is a veteran, and I saw your play, and things make more sense now. And you put words to things that he wasn't able to say. You put words to things that I thought was going on, but I wasn't sure. And so it didn't necessarily start out to be what it is. It just kind of morphed into this thing, and we've been working on it for a few years now. And we're hoping, honestly, just for outreach and just for as many people to see it as possible. We're not trying to make money on it, or, I mean, money would be cool, but it's obviously not one of our not one of our goals. Our goal is to keep doing what we're doing, and to show it places, and for people to go, I got something out of that helped me process something, or that helped me understand something. And right now that is our focus, is continuing to provide that service basically to people, both military and civilian alike, that they can help explain some of these things. And part of the reason it may be effective is because I approach it from a theater angle, but all these experiences, there were times where things would happen, and I would be like, am I the only one who thinks this is really fucked up right now? Like, is this weird? Like, is no one okay? This is normal. All right. And so I kind of approached it from this kind of weird angle, and I think almost from like an outsider perspective who found themselves just knee deep in it. And so I think maybe that was the perspective that helps. I'm not sure. I still don't know. I mean, it's a work in progress. We're still chewing on it, but so far it has helped people on both sides of the situation. And so we're just hoping to just kind of keep doing it and keep spreading it out. And really, honestly, just to help as many people as possible.
That's awesome.
Link up with veterans organizations, like, do whatever we can do just for that outreach, just to help people.
And so if people want to see it, you mentioned it's in different cities. Can they catch it on online?
Not quite yet. There's a few versions of it are floating around, but because it's a living document, me and Neil are actually continuing to work on it, and we're like adding stories and changing things. And
cool.
Our plan is to do Chicago, and then do the tour in Canada over the summer. And then we're going to really sharpen it, because he's doing 3 festivals in Canada. So there's going to be a lot of reps. Okay. And so I'll try to come out to one of those. And so that'll be kind of like almost like our final edition of it, at least for right now. Get those reps in, play that out, play with it a little bit longer. And then after Canada, based on the reception of it and kind of how it went, then we can kind of go forward and try to release it online and things like that. But there's still probably 3 or 4 more stories we're trying to work into it. So we're not quite happy with it yet, it being a final product. There's still a few things we're trying to tweak on it. So once it gets to that nice solid format, then we probably can release it like later. But right now we're still kind of in the development stage. But what I mean, it has an Instagram and all that stuff, and you can follow it. And if it's in your
Cool.
city, of course, I would invite anybody to see it. We give free tickets to military. We give comp tickets to military. So if it's in your city, you're invited to contact Neil, and it's just me and him. There's no like PR director or anything. So you can direct message Neil Brookshire on that Instagram account, and if you want a free ticket or if you're a veteran, and we want you to see it.
Awesome. So we'll have links so people can find it. I just want to make sure they knew where and how to
Perfect.
get it. Last two questions, then I'll get you out of here, Colin. So one is there anything that somebody gave you that had sentimental value, something you wanted to have with you when you were downrange?
Yeah, my mom did this, and it's just my mom got it from one of her patients. She had a Native American patient, and it was actually like a medicine bag, like a Native American like leather medicine bag, and apparently it had like been blessed, and it was like to keep you safe. And so I carried it in the shoulder pocket of my uniform,
That's
and I
cool.
guess it worked. So yeah, it was nothing crazy, but it was just can't hurt, right?
Yeah.
So,
Wards off bird flu.
It must.
Yeah.
Yeah. So nope, I kept that with me, and I guess it worked.
Awesome. And then we've kind of talked about this, but I still love to just ask the question, looking back on this time, and I know you've served a long time. Would you go back and do all that again?
I would. I guess there's certain things I maybe wish I would have grown up a little faster, just so I wouldn't have been as surprised when things happened. But absolutely, I'm very grateful for the things that I've experienced, as bad as they've been, because it kind of made me who I am, and it provided a solid like constitution. And I feel in my different jobs I've had, people get stressed out or melt down over things, and it's just like, I don't even care, man. Like that's what they want to do. Okay. And so that perspective for me has been everything, because it really helps like modify my stress level, and it pelts, and that's that perspective. That perspective is everything. And so I would not trade anything ever, because it gave me that kind of perspective that I know how bad it could be, and I know how good I have it. I can drink tap water, right? I got friends. I'm safe in my house. There's not gunmen running around the streets. I mean, I've seen that happen. And so here in little old Boise, Idaho, I mean, it's like, honestly, it's like a little slice of heaven, I can go skiing right now, there's night skiing. I could literally drive my car and catch a few hours on the slopes, like for fun.
That's cool.
So it provided that perspective, and that perspective that Iraq kind of taught me will carry me through the rest of my life. So I would not change anything.
Well, man, thanks so much for the time and the stories. Our first real 82nd person here, giving us behind the scenes of Bragg.
I hope it was illuminating.
Yeah, man, and great luck to you with Ben Compass. That's awesome, and people will be able to find you here in the description and show notes.
Awesome. I really appreciate it, man. And thank you so much for doing this.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story. We've had so many fans asking for just a conventional look at what it was like to be in the 82nd, and I hope you enjoyed that one as much as I did with Colin. Just incredible insight from somebody both in the infantry, but also having that medic responsibility. Just a couple of listener comments. We have a few comments on YouTube from subscribers. We've got Enigma IRL, who says, future generations have some awesome references for their history classes, those lucky bastards. I thought this one was appropriate. It doesn't matter which episode this one was on, because I think it's so fitting for so many of them, but I thought it was appropriate for Colin, given that he was in one of these large conventional units during such an important time in history in the Surge. So this will be a great one. First person reference on some amazing insights into what it was like downrange. And then we also had one from Grub 1962, another subscriber, so thank you. It says, this is about the Ryan Fischel Stinger episode, which has a ton of views. It says, holy sweet baby Jesus, that was awesome. Thanks to both of you for sharing your stories. So cool. So thank you to both of you for leaving these comments. As subscribers, it means a ton to me that you take your time with us each week. And then we also have a 5-star review on Apple Podcast from Misha075. It's titled Guest Request. It says, love your podcast. It'd be awesome for you to have Mike Pannone on the show. Former Delta, SF Recon, also US PSA shooter. Audience could learn a lot from him. So I just wanted you to know, I've reached out to Mike. I'll let you know what happens. If you have any pull with Mike, feel free to reach out as well and suggest he come on the show. He looks like he may as well be a brother of Todd Opalski. So I'd love to have him on. Thank you for the suggestion, and thanks for taking time to leave a 5-star review for us. It helps get this out to more people and share these great stories. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a great week. Stay safe.